So, now we're going to talk about action potential. And here is, we're going to be talking about a lot of different things. We're going to be talking about physics, biology, chemistry, all these different things. But what this all is, this is how you think. This is how you have a thought. This is how you have an emotion. This is how you feel love. This is how you make your heart beat. This is how everything that you do happens. So we're going to be learning about the cellular level of your thoughts and emotions. And that's awesome and kind of bananas. So in order to understand action potential is what is happening when your neurons are active, when they are communicating with one another. But when they're not, they're at rest. And so we call that resting potential. So resting potential has certain characteristics of what's going on with the various parts of the cell and the things in and around the cell. And that's what we're going to talk about first. So I remember that I mentioned that there's fluid inside your cells called intracellular fluid inside the cell, and then there's fluid outside your cells that's extracellular fluid, sometimes also called intercellular fluid. And that fluid is water. You've probably heard that most of your mass in your body is water. Well, when we lived in the oceans, before we evolved to be on land, we had water all around us. When we evolved to start coming out onto land, we needed to carry our water around with us. And so it's inside of us, and it's around all of our organs, including our brain, including our neurons. So what do you think, if you had to guess, what do you think is in that water outside your cells? What kind of water? Salt water, bless you, exactly right. So it's salt, bless you, in water. And salt, like you have on your table and like you have in your body, is sodium chloride. I'm sorry that sodium has stupid initials that don't make sense, but you know, Latin and Greek and all that. I had 5 years of Latin, so that's all I know. I don't know anything about Greek. And then chloride, that one's a little bit easier. Okay? So when it's sitting there on your kitchen table, it's sodium chloride, it's salt. When it's dissolved in the salt water in your body, you've got sodium chilling there in the water, and you've also got chloride. They're atoms, like on the periodic table of elements, right? But they're charged atoms. Any charged atom or molecule is called an ion. An ion is any atom or molecule that has lost or gained an electron. So if you remember from your chemistry classes, like when you were learning what is hydrogen, it's one proton and one electron, right? Traveling around the proton. But if the hydrogen atom were to pick up an extra electron, then it would be negatively charged, and it would be an ion. Or, if it lost an electron, it would be positively charged ion. Okay? So, an ion is just any atom or molecule that has a charge because it's lost or gained electrons. Inside the cell, on the inside of the cell, there are other ions. So sodium and chloride are mostly on the outside of the cell at rest. And on the inside, in the intracellular fluid, are potassium. Again, I'm sorry that potassium has a stupid letter, but that's potassium. And then there's this big anion called anion A. Anion just means a negative ion. And it's a big protein molecule, and it's very negative. Okay? It's always a downer at parties. No, just kidding. Okay. So Here's the big anion A, says protein. Protein A, okay, that's also fine, has lots of negative charge. That's what's on the inside. Okay. What's important about what's going to happen in action potential is how these things move around. The things that do or do not move around. When the cell is at rest, the inside of the cell is negative 70 millivolts compared to the outside of the cell. If they, and they have done this, if they were to put a little electrode inside the cell and outside the cell, a voltmeter, and measure the difference in voltage, it would be negative 70 inside the cell relative to the outside of the cell. Yes.
Sorry, that was in resting, you said?
At rest. Yes.
Negative 70 what?
Millivolts. Inside the cell compared to outside the cell. So it's negative inside the cell compared to the outside. Now there are two main forces of the universe, physically real forces, that are going to play important roles in what's about to happen during action potential. And those two forces are, well, you know what they are if you don't know the words. You know what these things are. Allow me to explain. The first one is diffusion. Diffusion just means that stuff, things, molecules, ions, move from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. And you know this. If I were to take this room and close all the doors and windows airtight and fill this room up with helium, what would happen when I open the door?
It's going to go out.
All the helium would rush out, right? What would come in its place?
Oxygen.
All the air on the outside, the oxygen, nitrogen, carbon, all the stuff that's in normal air would come in. Why? Diffusion. Because molecules move from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. We call that moving along the concentration gradient. A fart does the same thing. Right? It's all concentrated, you're like, oh God. And then it diffuses, thankfully, right? You pour your creamer in your coffee. At first you can see it all clumped together and then it diffuses. You put a drop of food coloring in a glass of water. And at first you can see the drop and then you see it diffuse into the rest of the water until it's all one uniform color. That's diffusion. But there's another force at work in the universe at all times too. And that is called electrostatic pressure or electrostatic force. Everybody in biology calls it electrostatic pressure, but I once had a physics major who really did not like that and wanted me to call it electrostatic force. Whatever. You can call it whatever. It's the same idea. And you know about this too. This is that positives attract negatives. Opposites attract. Do you ever remember playing with magnets when you were a little kid? Like you had two magnets. Some of them had little dogs on them. They were really cute. And if you clicked them together one way, they went and clicked. They like sucked right against each other and they clicked together, right? That's because you put the positive and negative ends together. Okay? And the positive and negative ends attract. But you remember how if you turned it the other way, it didn't work, it wouldn't go together? That's because you were either putting the two positive ends together or the two negative ends together. So negatives don't like negatives, they push each other away. Positives don't like positives, they push each other away. But negatives and positives love each other and come together. That's electrostatic pressure or electrostatic force. here in the extracellular fluid, like sodium and chloride. I put two pictures here because this one shows the sodium real nicely and it looks really clean and neat, but this one puts the chloride in too. So the chloride is depicted in these kind of pale pink bubbles. So I like that this one has the sodium and the chloride on the outside. Okay, so these two forces are always at work in the universe. They always want to do their thing. Diffusion always wants things to go from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. It's a law of physics. Electrostatic pressure wants opposites to attract. It's a law of physics. They're always at work. But they're always not wanting the same thing. Okay? When the cell is at rest, sodium and chloride are on the outside, and potassium and anion A are on the inside. Okay? At rest. That's where they are. Bless you. Sodium, chloride, potassium, anion A. Let's pretend that diffusion is the only force in the entire world. Let's pretend that diffusion is all there is. What is diffusion again?
High to low.
Stuff moving from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. I really encourage you to focus in on this and devote your brain energy to understanding this conceptually, okay? Try to focus in on this. It's important. Where is there a lot of sodium? On the outside. So according to diffusion, where does the sodium want to go?
Inside.
In. Exactly right. There's also a lot of chloride on the outside. So according to diffusion, what should chloride do? Go in. Exactly right. There's a lot of potassium on the inside. So what does diffusion want it to do? Go out. Exactly right. And all of the big protein anion A is on the inside. So what does diffusion want it to do? Go out. Exactly right. Now let's forget that. And let's pretend that electrostatic pressure is the only force in the universe. Now the inside of the cell is -70. The inside of the cell is very negative. And what wants to go to the negative? The positives, okay? The positives want to come in and cancel out the negatives. Sodium is positive, but it's negative in here. So according to electrostatic pressure, where should sodium go? In, exactly right. Now chloride is negative. So what should it do? Stay outside. Because it's very negative inside, and negative pushes away negative. So negative, stay outside, according to electrostatic pressure. How about potassium? Okay, mostly here on the inside, but it's very negative here on the inside. So what does electrostatic pressure want it to do? Stay in. Because it's positive, the potassium's positive, the inside is negative, so it should stay in. How about anion A? It's negative in here, anion A is very negative, so where should it go? Out. You will notice that these two forces are conflicting for chloride and potassium. In versus out, in versus out. So, When the cell is at rest, those ions tend to just stay where they are. Both chloride and potassium channels have ungated and gated channels. Some are gated, some are ungated. But it doesn't matter too much for the cell at rest because these two forces are going in two different directions. So the things tend to stay where they are. Sodium wants the same thing according to electrostatic pressure and diffusion. Both of those forces want sodium to go in. But all of the channels for sodium are gated and closed. So sodium can't come in. For anion A, both of the forces want it to go out. But there are no channels big enough for anion A to get out. That's why the cell is negative 70 millivolts at rest. Because there's a lot of anion A in there and it has no way of getting out. So it keeps the cell very negatively charged. And it has to be that way for action potential to happen. It has to be set up this way in order for action potential to happen. The other factor that's going to come into play at the end of action potential is this guy, the sodium-potassium pump. He is not a force of physics, okay? The sodium-potassium pump is made by our body. Our body constructed this guy because he's going to do an important job at the end, towards the end of action potential. We'll come back to him. When you receive a stimulation, a light, a sound, a smell, a taste, a touch, anything, some of these sodium gates along the dendrites open. And when they open, sodium comes in. Because both of these forces want it to come in, so it does. And as positive sodium comes into the cell, the inside of the cell gets more and more positive. So it goes from negative 70 to negative 68 to negative 66, up and up and up. So this stimulation is occurring at the dendrites. There's these gated sodium channels, and they're being opened, and sodium's coming in. The cell's charge is going up and up and up until it reaches a magic number. The magic number is called threshold. Threshold. And threshold is usually around negative 55 to negative 50 millivolts. Different cells have slightly different thresholds, but it's more or less around there. When the cell reaches threshold, when the charge reaches about negative 55, an action potential will occur. It's an all or none process. The action potential must occur if you reach threshold. So you have a sodium gate at first opening here and a sodium gate opening there with all these different stimulations. Cells going up and up and up, becoming more positive. And then what happens when we reach threshold is all the sodium gates open. The sodium gates that open are responsive to voltage. They are voltage sensitive gates. When the voltage gets to that point, to negative 55, they just fly open. That's their magic number for opening. And so now it's nice